So this video follows up the last one where I talk about the Vahki, and in this video I'm kind of going to defend the Vahki a little bit because I don't think that they're actually bad toys. I think they are good toys, in fact. In fact, if they are your first Bionicle sets, I think I can understand why you would really like them. They don't do anything worse than anything that came before them. I just think they're clunky in a few areas, which is why I addressed that in the video yesterday. There are a couple of things, though, that I think could be changed pretty minimally, too, to honestly improve the Vahki greatly without really even increasing the original design budget. Slightly increasing it, yes, because I am talking about the addition of caps. Caps are what I would consider masks, except I guess you could see them as not being masks if you want to see the Vahki as robot sets, because they go over the top of the head, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. So let's go ahead and start that, but first, if you are enjoying this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, consider it. It helps us out, and it gets us that much closer to 3,000. Without further ado, the Vahki. So yesterday I actually designed in a sketch, of course, a new design for what I would call the Vahki head, because one of my main issues with this head is while it looks pretty cool, there are a couple of issues with it. The large eye stalk is made of polypropylene, which is very prone to being damaged and scratched. I find these Vahki eye stalks scratched up all the time, scuffed up all the time, and I tend not to use them, which is pretty unfortunate. They're also kind of a hard piece to mock with, but that's a separate issue entirely. Rather, the other major issue I think with the head is that the main feature, the main selling point, I think, of the Vahki is that they can transform, but that head unfortunately collides with the body geometry itself. You can fix this by mounting the hips in a different way to some degree, but you're still going to run into some problem. And I think this is kind of intentional too in some ways to preserve the ability to actually swing the arms around. Maybe. I can't know that, obviously, but it does at least preserve that to some degree. However, my other major concern, major criticism of the Vahki is the crawl mode, which to me just feels a little bit clunky. Honestly, this mode just doesn't look that appealing to me. And maybe you disagree, but even when I first got them, when I saw this, I was just like, it looks so bulky, it looks so unnatural. And I get it, they're robots, they're not natural creatures in the first place. But as a toy, it felt worse than really anything that had come before. And I guess I hyped up this feature of like transforming in my mind. So when I saw it actually done, I was not super impressed. I think when these models are standing bipedally, they look pretty good. But when they are flipped back, when they're transformed, they look worse, and it sort of renders their function kind of useless. So what is the point in the first place, right? I think this can be addressed, and in fact, I built a very quick mock of a Vahki, which is not going to be perfect by any means. I'm not a toy designer, and of course, this is all with, Lego pieces, but just something to kind of address my main issue, transformation. First off, yes, the arms are definitely lower. They're lower on the body because the body basically doesn't exist in this version. I utilize the hips themselves to actually incorporate the function of the gear here. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. Is it awkward looking? Sure, definitely. Although proportionally, I don't think it's that bad since, again, this is a robot, and without the frame of reference of the original Vahki, if this had been what came off the shelf, I don't think we'd look at it and say, man, that's weird, it shouldn't look that way. There are aspects of it where absolutely we'd probably want it to change. For one thing, this has the thinner legs on it. I just wanted to see how they would look. I think they make the legs look a little bit too short, honestly, but maybe that's just me. That said, though, the transformation here is what is important because I allowed for the assembly for the neck here to adjust. Would Lego do this? No, not in this way. But would they do something like this? Maybe, perhaps. If I turn the legs down, they still function in the exact same way they did. Arms down, same thing. And it still preserves that side-to-side function, which I do kind of have some issues with, but I can look past that for a moment. However, when I turn the head up, you can see that this still looks a bit clunky, though I think actually slightly better. However, it really comes together when you move the head down. That ends up looking a lot better, in my opinion. Having the head closer to the ground, having that range of motion is also nice. And while we still have the long, chunky eye stalk here, which definitely collides with the body piece, I think it definitely looks better. So I think this is a better version of the set in transformation mode, whereas it's not quite as good in bipedal mode. I would want to see some kind of hybrid. And I am not the person to design that necessarily, though maybe I'll give it a shot in the future. That said, though, obviously doing this in a way that facilitates the head with few pieces and with still a constrained budget, I understand why that would be difficult. The second thing that I needed to address is back to the head. Again, as I mentioned, caps, right? I think caps are kind of a cool way to give the characters some unique qualities to them, but also the collectibles from 2004 are the Kanoka discs, right? Which I find kind of unfortunate because I think a lot of their novelty is worn off by the fact that there's really only 6 of them. Yeah, you can look at the numbers all you want, but numbers are not going to mean a lot to everybody who wants to collect them. And clearly, again, this was an easy way from Lego to cash grab and get money while still preserving budget. I get it. I don't justify it quite so much here. When we got the Toa Vakama set, we got this disc right here, leaving us wanting discs for the other 5 Toa, but we did not get that. So what I would propose is creating discs for the other 5 Toa in colors that are non-fluorescent. This would assume that transparent black, which exists in 2024, would also exist in 2004, which it did not, but let's just pretend it did for a moment. Whenua would get trans black, Oniwa would get trans brown, and basically you would just try to match the Metru's colors as close as you can with these discs. So what about fluorescence? Those are the discs that I would include with the Vahki sets, and I'll talk about why here in a moment. These discs for the other 5 Toa Metru, I think would be rare discs that come out of the Kanoka packs, so you have an incentive to go buy those Kanoka packs outside of just the recolor of the Metru Matoran launchers, right? I think that would be a lot of fun, and of course you still get the Metru Matoran discs out of those packs. Those would be the common discs that you would find, and then you could have some story significance as to why certain discs need to be found. There were discs that had to be found anyway, and having them just be the Matoran discs felt, I don't know. It's not my thing. So with the Vahki, what I would do is introduce another 6 colors of these, transparent, but this time all of them fluorescent, including a color like trans bright green. Again, not a color that I'm aware existed, in fact did not exist from Lego in 2004, but just bear with me for a moment. We're playing the thought game, right? Why would I want these to fluoresce? Well, these are essentially my answer to the brain stalk. The brain stalk piece being polypropylene does make it prone to scratching, and while, Toa Metru had masks that were polypropylene too, I'm not opposed to those parts existing on the head, but the brain stalk is such a large piece, it's easy to get damaged, especially when thrown in a box with the rest of your collection. Rather, what I would like to do is introduce a cap made of that polypropylene, and this is the design I came up with. Let's go ahead and open it over in Paint. Now, remember, if you were judging this, you would be judging it in my hypothetical scenario as though the Vahki never existed, not as we got them, right? So although I'm doing a comparison between the Vahki we got in the animation style here and the drawing that I made over on Paint, we would only know of one of these if my hypothetical were true, right? And I think that this kind of works. Is it perfect? No. Does it have flaws? Absolutely. But this one right here is also as many pieces, if not technically one fewer pieces, than the Vahki head above. The mandibles, I've decided, although I talked about this over on Discord, would be one singular piece, and they would connect via pins to pin holes in this cap design. At least that's where I'm at so far. Meaning that you could potentially even design the cap itself around being squeezed to incorporate the squeezing function of the mandibles and thus shooting out the disc, right? On top of that, though, the disc, when not in use, when not in the mandibles, could be stored on the back of the head, meaning that the Vahki head that we get would be slightly modified to incorporate this. It'd still be roughly the same size with similar connections, though not all of the same connections. And I did design a quick assembly for this version too. That's a separate thing. But on the bottom side of the cap would be a little nub of extra plastic so that when the disc is inserted, it would clip underneath it and it would hold in place more securely than the mandibles. Because as I mentioned in the previous video, although the mandibles do a pretty good job of holding the disc, they're not perfect. And there are plenty of scenarios where I've had the disc fall out. And so this is just a little more protected from all sides. But since these discs would be transparent, you could align them with the eye holes in these caps. And thus when the light hits this fluorescent plastic, they would glow and thus glow through the eye holes as well. You could have a story reason as to why when the disc is removed, the eyes no longer glow. Maybe it's, the Vahki's kind of last stand, right? They rely on their stabs first, but if they've got to shoot a projectile, they're going to do it. They take the disc out. It's in their mandibles. I'm sure they don't physically take it out. There's probably some canon way as to how it gets from here to here, whatever the case may be, right? But the point I'm trying to get at is that the disc launches and now there's no more disc in the head, no more disc in the mouth. And so you could see this as maybe like a recharge mode, right? Yeah, the eyes don't have any power in them. And so when the eyes light up, it signifies when they're fully charged up. Or again, you could have any other reason why these two things end up kind of correlating. It also gives the mask gives the disc more of a mask-like effect, right? Because these discs as collectibles, they are not masks, but in this way, they would feel a little bit like masks. Obviously, the cap is what sort of works as the mask in this scenario, but having the disc be inside of it, being sort of charging up that piece, would make it feel a little more special than just a projectile. And I think that would help to make them feel a lot more important. And the Metromotorin having glow-in-the-dark discs could also mean you have glow-in-the-dark eyes if you wanted to swap it out for one of those. Since those are sort of the powerful discs, maybe the Vahki are also going after them, in a way kind of mimicking the chase for the Mask of Life, right? And in some ways mimicking the Baraki with how the mandibles connect here, although again, in this case, the mandible are a single piece. You just see them on the screen as two pieces because part of it is blocked by the geometry of these pieces. With that said, I know that the perspective here is a little bit wonky because you can see the disc kind of from straight up, but in reality, that disc would actually be flat along the back of the head. So you're sort of seeing the front of the mask and the top of the mask projected at the same time, which is not realistic, but bear with me here. Something else that's interesting, though, about polypropylene is that it can be made translucent. And though I've never really seen Lego take this to its full effect, I have definitely seen polypropylene pieces from Lego being translucent, usually as a quality control problem. But if they had actually leaned into it here, I think they could have done something very interesting. So on the cover of the Vahki box art, and honestly, a lot of the box art that went around during 2004, a lot of the promotional material, we saw those towers in the background. I don't personally know what those towers were supposed to be. I assume they were either like the Coliseum or the Foundry area, whatever may be. That's not important here. And obviously, in my version of this story, the significance of that building would probably change because I want to go back into the mystery a little bit. So we know that the Vahki are the villains. Maybe we don't necessarily know why yet. Maybe we don't know that Taraga Doom is bad yet, whatever the case may be. But if the top of that headpiece was made thinner than usual for polypropylene, with the exception of those 3 marks on the forehead, make those thicker plastic, make them matte material while the rest of it is glossy, and suddenly these discs glow, they light up, they fluoresce. Well, that fluorescence is going to show through the top of that mask, illuminating the negative space around these 3 bits of thicker plastic, and thus illuminating that tower structure design in the top of the mask. And I think that would make that sort of feel more mysterious, right? If we don't know its purpose yet, but we're seeing it in all this promotional material and we're seeing it on the villain's head, I think we'd start to be like, okay, so these are tied to that building, but why? What is the significance here? And I think that that's a really important thing too, because again, there is novelty in mystery. There is sales driven by mystery. Lastly, each of these masks, heads, whatever, would be slightly different between each other. The molds would be slightly different. The geometry, I think, is roughly identical between them, but the features on them would vary slightly. So I came up with 6 different designs for the eye shape, 6 different designs for the sort of earlobe pieces, the same lobes that would mimic this design here, right? To sort of match and reflect the shape of those eyes. And also just details on the other faces of the mask. So those lobes could have some slight textural details. The little cheek areas below the eyes could have different details on them as well. And that way, each of them feel a little bit special, a little bit unique, but they still can be interchangeable. Because at the end of the day, these are robots after all, right? And this also means, because Lego Bionicle never gave us a dark bluish gray mask, that if we had gotten the Nadiki set with a dark bluish gray version of this piece, we would get at least something close, right? Because obviously we got the dark bluish gray Vahki head on that set, and if they stayed with that color and gave us some other color of disc, even if it was a recolor of any of the other discs with maybe a different print on it, it doesn't have to be a unique color. Well, in that case, I think you'd have something kind of striking there, right? Overall, I think this is really interesting, and it's 1 fewer pieces, as I mentioned, than the Vahki head, because the mandible is 1 piece. The mandible connects via 2 pins to the sides of the cap here, so the cap goes over the top of the modified Vahki head. The mandibles then come in from underneath and connect. You could design it in such a way where squeezing the mandibles or squeezing the sides of the cap would actually shoot the disc. That's not for me to do. And then, of course, the disc itself replaces the eye stalk. So the 1 piece that you actually remove in this case is the axle. Even if you went with the Vahki's original design, though, you could still design a cap that could replace that axle too, and thus separate the eyes from the rest of the eye stalk, as I mentioned. So I really like this idea. Again, is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But to me, it ties the design of the characters into the story more. And I think changing the story ever so slightly to sort of incorporate the design of this head of this creature, right, would help to make us maybe even sympathize with these characters a bit more, because it's hard to sympathize with RoboCops, right? But it's a lot easier to sympathize with something when we don't necessarily know what it is, but we know that it's maybe coming after us, right? Maybe it's part of the story finding out that, oh wait, hold on, these are robots. We thought these were creatures coming after us. Maybe Taraga Doom poises them as, oh, we're being invaded by these creatures, but really he's the creator of them and they're robots. And suddenly you're thinking, oh wait, hold on, something else is going on here, something deeper. We need to get to that building and find out what's going on. And I think that's really exciting, more exciting than a plant, and that's coming from me as a plant lover, right? Have Taraga Doom appear maybe in 2004, but have him be the villain maybe of 2005, or at least part of 2005. And then Vahki and Vizorak and something like that can happen as well later on. Whatever the case may be, I think this is a really interesting concept at the very least. Would it have fixed the Vahki? No, absolutely not. And the other change I would make too, just before we end this video, is to the weapons themselves. As I mentioned, I said in the previous video that they're not identifiable. I kind of misspoke there. I don't mean that I can't identify aspects of them. They're just a lot more kitbash than anything we had before. And if that's your flavor, then I think you might like the Vahki weapons a lot. But I don't really care for it quite as much, because when I see something like this, yeah, I see hook-shaped mass, but I don't signify this as a hook. I think about the closest weapon that we got from the Vahki that is identifiable is the saw weapon, because a majority of this is saw, and that's easy to identify. The rest of the weapon is a fairly simple design as well that shares design language a lot with other Bionicle weapons that came out before it, so this doesn't even look as amorphous as other pieces. It's still definitely there, but it is at the very least identifiable, more so than most other weapons. So with all of that being said, I also find it interesting that there's 2 axles on here, but the other one never goes used in anything as far as I'm aware. With that being said, that's my thoughts on the Vahki. I do think that they are good toys. I think they're a few steps backwards in a lot of ways for Bionicle, but that's not always a bad thing. I am somebody who likes classic Bionicle after all. And again, if these were your first sets, well, honestly, they're pretty good. And even if you didn't get the rock sheet, they're kind of a step up in some ways, at least from the Brock, and they're a refreshing take on Bionicle as a whole. Missing the masks here, having people associate, well, the missing masks mean that they're robots. That's fine and all, but remember, LEGO comes up with the story that they're robots, and clearly they could have said that to justify not including masks with them in the first place. Just a thought, but it's worth thinking about anyway. So that's it for this video, and again, thank you so much for all the views on yesterday's video. I didn't expect it to get that many views, to be honest. Of course, if you want to take the conversation further, you can check out the comments below. Let me know your thoughts on this video. Do you like this idea? Do you hate this idea? Would you change this idea? And if so, how? But if you want to take that conversation further, check out the Discord, Instagram, and Patreon, all of which are linked down in the description below, and of course, help the channel like this. And you can also help the channel with likes and subscribes if I didn't say that already. All right. Take care, guys.